Good morning, it's Tuesday the 22nd of October. I'm doing the van's front dress. It's an American term, relates to all the pulleys and belts and bits and pieces on a vehicle. I've had a few Ford Mustang V8 engine vehicles. You get the odd issues with serpentine belts, squeaks, bits and pieces, bearing failures, so on and so forth. This van's done over 300,000 miles. It's by far the highest mileage vehicle I've ever owned. When I bought it, there was a significant fuel leak, diesel fuel leak, from the fuel filter, which is, where am I looking, there it is, there, that's the fuel filter, and that plastic cap at the top there has a water and fuel sensor in it, and at some point in time, it must have been relatively recent before I bought the vehicle, somebody had either changed the fuel filter or done something and not assembled it properly, and they'd actually cracked the plastic housing of that sensor. And when this van was delivered, I had it delivered, there was diesel fuel pouring out of this filter into the V of the engine and out of the weep holes at the front and rear of the V. This is V6. How the guy didn't set himself on fire, you know, diesel was very forgiving, petrol wouldn't be so forgiving, but how this thing didn't come burst into flames on the way here, I don't know. It must have lost several gallons of diesel if the leak was that significant. So I replaced that, cleaned up all the mess because there was quite a lot of muck under the vehicle. But in use over the past few weeks, I've noticed I always have an oil leak. It can be tricky to fathom out where oil leaks come from. The Mercedes V6 engine is famed for having issues with the oil cooler, which is right in the centre of the V, difficult to get to. The rubber seals for that can fail, and then you get oil typically pouring out of the weep hole. It collects in the V of the engine and then eventually finds a weep hole at the back of the block, drips down all over the starter motor and so on like that. This one, the leak is a little bit different. I'm not 100% sure exactly where it is at the moment. It's going to be a bit of a funny angle. I think I have a leak from the oil filter housing. This is another known trouble spot area. The filter housing is actually made of two parts. The part that the cap screws onto has a silicon RTV, whatever you call it, gasket. They're not, you can't buy them, and typically if you have to replace that, you either have to go out making a new gasket using a compound, or you have to buy a completely new housing. When I bought this van, they told me they'd identified a leak there and they'd replaced this part. That's bullshit. They haven't replaced anything. And I think they just, well, fobbed me off. I've noticed when I'm driving, or not driving the van, I've noticed when I start the vehicle, I'm getting quite a few drops of oil on the floor. Enough that I think it would fail the MOT, because oil leaks are now taken into account with the MOT. I have laid underneath the van, I've taken the washer bottle out, I've taken as much apart as possible, trying to see where it's coming from, and it's coming from this corner in the vicinity of this oil filter housing. But I cannot see exactly where it's coming from. I'm pretty confident it isn't coming out of the V. I can, now that I've dismantled partly, see into the V, it's bone dry. But the weird thing is, there's so much oil leaking, even with the mirror, I can't see the source of it. It's very, very odd. So, yesterday I decided it was time to strip off the front, or at least get to the housing, and at the same time I will have the serpentine belt off, which is there. Oh, aircon pipe's in the way. There. That drives the power steering pump, the alternator, the water pumps, and so on and so forth. There are idler pulleys that are lifed, you know, typically 50 odd thousand miles. They should be changed. I do have a service history for this vehicle. I know when it's had oil changes, I know when the automatic gearbox oil was done. I don't have component history though. Unfortunately, they didn't provide me any indication of whether it's on the original engine or what, whether they changed wheel bearings. I don't have any of that detail. So I don't know when the belts were last done. I don't know if it's on the original alternator. I just haven't got any information about that at all, unfortunately. I have got a squeak. I don't know where it's coming from. Probably one of the idler pulleys, but I have got a squeak. As part of the exercise to get this filter housing off, you have to take or you have to disconnect the belt anyway, because you need to actually get it out of the way for the bolts. So I've decided that while I'm dealing with this oil leak, I'll have the belts off, inspect them, look at all the pulleys, see if I've got any playing anything. And the other job I'm going to do is I'm going to drop the alternator off, which is right down in the depths there. No, can't see it. It's right down in the depths. I'm going to pull the brush pack out, the regulator and brush pack, and just see what state the brushes are in. If this is the original alternator in its original state, I doubt there's very much left on those brushes, so it may be prudent to buy a brush pack and fit it as well, especially as I'm not seeing the level of voltage from this alternator I'd normally expect. Typically, with the battery fully charged, most car alternators are chucking about 14.4 volts out. This thing's only doing about 14 volts at best. It may be down to the loading on it from the various ancillaries, but this is a 220 amp alternator. It should be more than capable of charging the batteries and running the engine in normal use. I've been on various Mercedes forums, and I've not seen a definitive answer of what these alternators chuck out. So it may well be it doesn't actually chuck out the voltage I'm expecting. But every other car I've ever had has always been about 14.4 volts. So it'd be prudent again, if the brushes are too short, I'll buy a new regulator and bung that in. It may just about be doable from the back of the vehicle, but it may be easier while I've got all the belts off. The other thing that can happen with alternators, it's rare but it can happen, an alternator produces AC current, that is rectified through diodes into DC, and then it goes through the voltage regulator before it goes out to the vehicle electrics. Diodes conduct electricity in one direction only. That's effectively how they manage to convert alternating current to DC. If a diode begins to fail, then it will allow some reverse leakage of current through to earth, or in the case of an alternator, through to earth. You don't want that, because an alternator is one of the few things in a vehicle that's directly connected to the batteries. So any leakage will result in a parasitic load on the batteries, and you'll end up with battery drain. I do have a bit of battery drain in this van. I actually think it's just some of the electronics, but it doesn't hurt to just measure with a meter whether there's any reverse leakage through the diodes. So this video was really just to show you basically the depths of a V6 diesel, or an Om642 V6 diesel, with the fan shroud removed. And one of the interesting, I'll just pull the camera back, one of the interesting exercises in doing any work on the front dress of a lot of vehicles is you have to get the radiator fan, the cooling fan, off first. Always fun and games. It's pretty obvious if I zoom in. I think you can see. You can see on this one lots of air chisel marks. I reckon the workshops, when they're taking these fans off, because obviously this one's been on and off several times over the years, the belts have been changed, they use an air chisel to undo the nut. I don't have an air chisel and I'd probably make a Horlicks of it if I did use it. The normal requirement is a 36mm spanner. Zoom out. I went and bought one yesterday. I didn't have a spanner big enough. I did try using a set of wrenches, set of adjustable spanners, but I just couldn't get the purchase on it. So I went and bought that. But even with the spanner, a little trick is just to give it a wallop with a hammer, and hopefully the friction of the belt will allow the nut to come undone. I couldn't get it to work like that, so just lowering the camera down again. I ended up making a tool. This is a bit of steel bar, usually used for bracing roofing timbers to walls in houses. And normally when you're taking these fans off, all you need is a bit of flat bar with some holes in. And you can get them on the nuts of the pulley that the fan bolts onto, and away you go. Unfortunately, this pulley, the nuts are, bolts rather, Torx bolts, are recessed into the pulley. So I had to make something with a bit of a protrusion. And what I've used is a couple of either M10 or M12, not sure what, cap bolts, so that I can actually make use of the hole in them over the top of the bolts in the pulley. Now that space in there between centres is 40mm, and that fits perfectly. I've actually cut out a bit of the metal, and this is actually quite a reasonable thickness of steel. It's not going to go anywhere. I didn't want anything that would bend. I've cut out a recess there so that it could go over the edge of the nut, and I was able to undo it. It's always worth bearing in mind that the nut may well not be a standard right hand thread. This one is left hand thread, and the way to tell is very, very easy, very, very simple. The way to tell with these things is you look at the direction of the fan blades. If the fan blade is pointing in that direction like this one is, then that is the direction you turn the nut to undo it. So it is effectively, it's threaded onto the pulley there, and to undo it, because it's left hand thread, you're actually rotating it clockwise when standing in front of the vehicle. But there is a lot of confusion with people. You know, they're sitting and look at these nuts, can't fathom out which way to go. But it may not be 100% foolproof, but typically the direction of the fan blades in pulling air through into the vehicle tell you which way the motor's rotating, and tells you which way you need to actually turn the nut to undo it. So that's where we are at the moment. I've just literally finished pulling this fan off. You have to take the fan off in order to get the plastic fan shroud off, which is this dirty great big thing here. Because otherwise you cannot get to the belts, you can't get to the bolts I need to undo for this oil-filled housing. It's just in the way, and unfortunately the design is such that, you know, they perhaps could have made that in two parts, so you could just unclip it top and bottom and leave the fan in place. It's a bit of a faff, because undoing that nut on that fan is by far the most annoying part of the exercise. But that's off now. You say it's getting really grubby. Ugh. I haven't got my gloves on. And now I can mess about. I've already ordered a gasket for the oil-filled housing. I'm now going to take the Serpentine belt off, inspect it, and see if I can find any squeaky pulleys or find any bearings with any grit in it. As well as the tensioner, there are two idler pulleys in this fan. The one on the left, bearings running fine, no obvious signs of wear, but the flat side of the belt does run on that particular pulley. The one on the right, bearings are noisy. It's running freely, but the bearing is noisy. You can feel a bit of grittiness in there. You can see that the webbed part of the belt has actually left grooves in the plastic. This hasn't been changed for a while, as far as I can tell. So both of those are going to get changed and replaced. The belt's fine, or the belt looks fine. I would order a spare anyway, but I don't think I'm going to change the belt. But certainly this pulley's not been off. The right hand pulley is actually behind the Viscous fan pulley, and you can't actually remove it without taking the Viscous fan pulley off either, which is for Torx bolts. I've taken the auxiliary belt off that drives the Viscous fan and the additional aircon compressor, That has a slight nick in it, so I've ordered a replacement and I'll keep the other one as a spare. It actually looks like it's the sort of belt you can just about change from underneath the van without taking too much apart. I don't ever want to find out, but I'll keep it as a spare anyway. Whereas the main belt, the large Serpentine belt, that's tools, spanners, a fair amount of work, because all this plastic shroud's got to come out as well. But there you go, one obviously seen better days idler pulley. I've taken the alternator apart. I wanted to see what state the brushes are in. Top one's not too bad, bottom brush is worn down enough that there ain't a lot of miles left in that. This alternator's a replacement, remanufactured part. It's made by Valeo. The slip rings are fine. It looks to me like this alternator was changed in 2016, probably about 100,000 miles ago. The bearings and slip rings are fine, but the brushes are just short enough that for a £5 I shall change them anyway. They're normally sticking out about, well, more than that. Little plastic cap just unclips, and then it's very easy to actually change these. They're just unsolder. Some of the parts have arrived. These are the replacement idlers, a couple of those. That's the poly belt for the Viscous fan and the aircon compressor. The one that was fitted to the van has a very slight crack in it on the side, so I'll just change it for preventative maintenance. That gasket there is the gasket for the oil cooler housing, which is why I decided to start this piece of work anyway, because the oil cooler housing appears to be leaking. I've cleaned the EGR valve up. It was pretty much spotless. There isn't any carbon in the inlet track at all. The connecting pipe, Mercedes-Benz recommend that is cleaned every 40,000 miles anyway. These can get crudded up. There was a bit of carbon build up in there, but not a great deal, so I've cleaned it up. But certainly the actual EGR valve itself, a bit of brake cleaner, I've just cleaned it, but there was no real need to have taken it out. I'm going to reassemble that, put it back together now. Can't put the van completely together until the brushes I've ordered for this regulator turn up. Probably won't arrive till Saturday, but I can reassemble quite a bit more now and tackle the, as I said, the initial problem of replacing this little gasket with, or seal rather, on the oil cooler, oil filter housing, and I do hope that is the reason for the oil leak. Otherwise I have to take it all apart again. It's worth pointing out that curve there. That curve actually goes into the inlet tract. You have to take the EGR valve out to be able to get that pipe out. It's trapped otherwise, but it's definitely worth cleaning it. I've just removed the oil filter housing. I'm just draining the oil out of it. There's a marked difference in the shape of the gasket. The new one has a tapered edge, so I guess the way the thing works is it crushes down when it's tightened up. But I'm going to leave that now overnight just to drain out so I can clean it all up. And there's a very nice puddle in my tray under the van. I reckon there's a good pint of oil that's come out. Again, I'm letting that drain down now, just so I can clean up the area before I refit this. It's important to clean up as much as I can, because if the leak isn't coming from this sill on this housing, it's somewhere around there, and I need it as clean as possible so I could have another good look. One of the advantages of having the fan out is once I've done this work, and I shall restart the engine with the fan still off and the shroud out, and I should be able to have a reasonably good idea whether I've fixed it or not. I hope so anyway. Don't like doing oily stuff. Don't like paying people to do it either, so it has to be a compromise. I've got a handy printout from the workshop manual showing me which bolts, etc, etc, need to be undone. Whoops, stop moving the camera. Show me what needs to be taken apart. So I've got that pegged up in a convenient place. It's pretty difficult to see the 4 bolts you have to actually remove. Good morning, it's Sunday morning. We've had 3 inches of rain over the past couple of days. Dark, grotty and horrible. All the parts I ordered arrived except for the brushes for the alternator, which turned up yesterday evening on an Amazon next day delivery, which turned out to be 2.5 days. They aren't getting very good at getting things on time at the moment. I've cleaned up as much oil as possible from around the engine, especially around the EGR valve and the intake system. Externally it was disgusting. So bad in fact that the alternator, at the front of the alternator, was actually caked with oil and mud to the point where it was actually obstructing the access to the vent for the ventilation fans. I've taken off and refitted the oil filter housing. The rubber gasket hadn't perished, it had hardened to the point where it's actually virtually flush with the flange. It sits in a recess all the way around the flange of the housing. When I took it off, it just broke up. It had perished, it was finished. So I am hoping that the oil leak was coming from there, but at least I've cleaned up all the mess on the engine and I'll be able to see better where it's coming from, if it isn't coming from that. I've got that strap there is holding up the air conditioning compressor out of the way, because you have to remove the air conditioning compressor, or the secondary air conditioning compressor that this vehicle's fitted with, in order to actually get the alternator off. Just lowering the camera back down, and then over there on the table I've got all my bits ready to reinstall. So alternator's going back in next. That metal carrier there with the pulley on is the carrier for the air conditioning compressor. I've got the antifreeze that I drained out of it to put back in, plus some more should I need it. Interesting, it's orange. That's OAT, I believe, or pink. I thought you didn't put OAT in these vans, and I went to go and buy some and it was blue, the recommended stuff. So I'm going to put back in what came out and look it up. That little plastic piece there is just a cover that goes on top of the fan shroud, and then there's a couple of hoses and bits and pieces over there, and a box of bolts. So with a bit of luck, it's a lovely sunny day today. Forecast is sunshine through Monday, Tuesday, maybe into Wednesday. I want to get this thrown back together. Potentially we're off tomorrow, Tuesday. May well go to Anglesey, find a beach, park up and just enjoy the last few sunny days of the year. But I shall put this back together now, and hopefully everything will work. The new brushes I bought for this alternator fitted perfectly, dead easy to do. Fingers crossed I haven't screwed it up and it works properly, or fingers crossed that I haven't screwed it up and it still works because it's working properly beforehand. Right, pause. Probably worth mentioning, a lot of the bolts in this Mercedes van are Torx headed bolts. These fall for the alternator, for example. They use either an E10 or an E12 socket. Well worth buying. Pretty cheap in Halfords or wherever. They're 3/8 fittings, or the ones I bought 3/8 fittings, so I've got a 1/2 inch to 3/8 adapter on my little stubby ratchet as well. But yeah, in order to do any sort of work on these sort of vehicles, you definitely need this type of fitting for your socket set. If you use standard sockets, they will fit. 7/16 for example will fit instead of an E12, but you risk rounding things off. The other thing you need is a fairly low rating torque wrench. A lot of the bolts are done up to quite low torque settings, 8, 10, 12, 14 Newton meters. Worth having one of those as well. This bit is the auxiliary belt tensioner for the Viscous fan and the secondary AC compressor. I think normally there's just a little belt that's just tight between the fan and the crankshaft pulley, but because this vehicle's got an additional air conditioning compressor on, it's also got this tensioner. There is a pivot point there, and that was C-solid. Well, not C-solid, but the tensioner wasn't doing a great deal. I've been getting a bit of belt squill. That's probably what the cause was. So I've just had it apart. You can remove the centre pin. There's a tight fitting washer on the other side. Once that comes off, the pin should actually just pull out, but this was seized in. The pin was rusty. There was no grease left inside the bush. There's actually a gap inside the plastic bushing, poly bush, whatever it is, for grease. So I just noticed this was exceedingly tight, so I've stripped this down and cleaned it as well. I think next time I do this job, I will replace this, but it's serviceable at the moment. All done. Everything running as it should do, assuming anyone can hear me. If not, I'm going to mute the sound, but all finished. So there we are, all finished. Just finished topping up the washer bottle, checking the levels, and check the oil in the morning because it did lose about a pint, although I think this was a bit over full. I'm looking at the gauge before I actually took it apart, so let it settle again. No obvious leaks. Pretty sure I've sorted the oil leak out, so that's front dress done, belts, pulleys, tensioners, including the stuck one. So far so good. If you don't hear from me again, I exploded somewhere in darkest Wales. Thanks for watching.